Good morning, Wabash. So this week, speaking in Pioneer Chapel will be Gregory Hess, with his talk titled, Let Me Be Franks with You. President Gregory Hess is an economist and is the 16th president of Wabash College. He's a native of San Francisco, and he earned his bachelor's degree with high honors from the University of California, Davis. Further going on to get his PhD in economics from the Johns Hopkins University. He has held teaching positions at many colleges, including Carnegie Mellon University, the University of Kansas, St. John's College in Cambridge, University of Cambridge, Oberlin College, Claremont McKenna College, and Wabash. During his tenure, President Hess has advocated passionately for Wabash students, cheering them on to victory on all playing fields, watching their performances, and most importantly, investing in innovative liberal arts plus initiatives that broaden the experiences of all Wabash men. Please welcome President Gregory Hess.
Thank you, everyone. If my chapel talk were a t-shirt I could gift you, it would read, "My president joined an immersion learning course in Spain, and all I got was this lousy chapel talk." Laura and I spent the early summer embedded in an immersion learning course. The class we joined was Professor Gomez's Spanish 313, El Camino de Santiago, Pilgrimages, Old and New. For those of you whose Spanish is worse than mine, and there can't be many, El Camino stands for the walk, or the way. The Camino is a set of paths that form an ancient pilgrimage that take peregrinos or pilgrims to Santiago, where the bones of Saint Iago, who's better known as St. James the Greater, are purportedly buried. We hiked over 100 miles over 7 days, which is a fifth of what is considered to be kind of the full Camino that is highlighted in many books and many movies. While there were many exceptional facets to the pilgrimage, one truly great aspect was the opportunity to reflect. And now reflection is an incredibly important thing we do here at Wabash College. Reflection, if you recall from my speech last year, is one of what I call our 3 R's, along with responsibility that we talk about in the Gentleman's Rule, and also resilience, which is a cousin to when we put out the cheer of Wabash Always Fights. Now, reflection is a time-consuming process, but it is critical to seek opportunities to take a step back in life, take a deep breath, and take stock of what is going on around you. And while many of my fellow pilgrims will breathe easier when I say that what happens on the Camino stays on the Camino, and you know who you are, my chapel talk today is a byproduct of this pilgrimage I shared with my wife Laura, faculty members Gilberto Gomez and Dan Rogers, and my Wabash brothers. As the saying goes, we are living in interesting times, very interesting times. Both here and elsewhere, almost every single individual in every single country feels less certain of their prospects now when compared to 10 or 15 years ago. We are in a period of rapid and unceasing change. If the U.S. and the world had an anxiety meter, it would probably read very high, maybe 11 out of 10. People feel untethered. Our institution and norms seem unmoored. These are not perceived to be good things, but one must be careful to make normative judgments about what is part of the inexorable change that constantly drives our world. It's been going on for a while now, and I don't know the absolute cause of when the footing beneath us began to shake. But let me give you a couple of thoughts. I'm tempted to point to the financial crisis that took place over 10 years ago as the starting point, but there was anger even before then. I'm also drawn to think that maybe it began in the 1970s when income mobility in the United States and other countries began to decline. Or perhaps when the Twin Towers were destroyed in the terrorist strike as we crossed into the new millennium. These are all contributions, I'm sure, but perhaps not causal to the collective angst that we are all experiencing. What I do know is that people across income groups, gender, educational attainment, and geography found their angry button some time ago and demanded retribution based on a perceived lack of justice and fairness to themselves and or others. Some who are angry for the same reasons. Some are angry for different reasons. And some who are just angry because as the number of angry people rises, disproportionately louder and angrier everyone seems to be. The good news is that people care, not just about themselves, but others too. People care about their environment, their schools, their churches, their synagogues and mosques, governments, and their safety. The bad news is that some people care too much and that their cares often clash with one another. So how on this pilgrimage, how on this journey do I make sense of what I see going on around me? Or rather, how do I figure out how to see the world anew, given all that is going on around me? And that is what dawned on me on the Camino. I want to start by talking about three personalities. This is based on the title of the talk. Two of them are fake and one is real, and all of them are named Frank. That explains the title of the talk, which had everyone scratching their head. I want to layer these Franks on in the same way that a kaleidoscope combines prisms so that we can see things both simultaneously and yet from alternative perspectives. These Franks are just filters I am applying one on top of the other so that I can see things a little clearer and glimpse some things that are true. These Franks are my primary colors, and when combined, they help me better understand what is going on. And just like everyone, I have a favorite color, though you do need to have a lot of colors in order to see the world clearly. Well, I'm going to start my apologies now. We're going to have to begin, like many good people in this world, with binge watching. I apologize in advance for doing this, but in a high-anxiety world, I'm having a lot harder time reading great literature. So I'll begin by talking about what I call a cringe-worthy show, and here's the disclaimer. I'm going to say it several times. I am not recommending you watch it. I am not endorsing it, and I have not fully watched it. Repeat, I am not recommending that you watch it. If it helps you to not watch it for me to tell you to watch it, consider that I'm telling you to watch it so that you don't watch it. But the first Frank I use to understand the world is Frank Gallagher from Showtime's Shameless. There you go. Frank Gallagher is the patriarch, what can only be described as our country's most dysfunctional family of 2 daughters, 4 sons, whole host of other possible children, 2.0 children, partners, ex-partners, and spouses. And as its leader, there is not a single shameless thing, from drugs to selling his children, stealing from the homeless, selling his kidney, theft, whatever, that Frank will not do to both prolong his survival and increase his addictive sense of pleasure. He is, in a single word, shameless. While Frank's motives are never pure, those of his children are often portrayed to be. And yet his kids make decisions that lead them down the same shameless path to self-destruction with delusional glimpses of victory. While the family is obviously a caricature of aspects of our society, the fact is that the Gallagher family focuses every day on survival. Most days they have very few attractive choices, if any choices at all. One of the signature statements comes from the show's eldest son, Lip, which is, when you're poor, the only way to make money is to steal it or scam it. There's not a great set of choices. That's not a great set of choices, and it does not speak to many paths of opportunity. So, on the Camino, thinking about Frank Gallagher made me ponder the ways that hopelessness has taken root for those with little and who perceive that they have few opportunities. This is touched upon in the book Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance, which I do highly recommend. So I do recommend that. That's a good recommendation. That's a recommendation that I'm actually recommending the book. Vance provides an autobiographical narrative of both the unlikelihood of upward mobility in our society and his battle scars as someone who successfully made the leap. Vance writes, "This book is about what goes on in the lives of real people when the industrial economy goes south. It's about reacting to bad circumstances in the worst way possible. It's about a culture that increasingly encourages social decay instead of counteracting it. The problems run far deeper than macroeconomic trends and policy," he goes on to say. "Too many young men immune from hard work, good jobs impossible to fill for any length of time, and a young man with every reason to work, a wife to be to support, and a baby on the way, carelessly tossing aside a good job with excellent health insurance. More troubling, when it's all over, he thought something bad had been done to him. There is a lack of agency here, a feeling that you have little control over your life, and a willingness to blame everyone but yourself." So hopelessness, the perceived lack of good choices, and the consequences thereof is our first Frank that I find myself thinking about. Let's get to the second Frank, and once again, I apologize. You got to be binge watching to get to the second one. The second Frank, Prism, is as dark as the first, but it comes from a very different source. If hopelessness is rooted in the lack of good choices, our second Frank has lots of choices and manipulates situations to gain even more. It's not about his options or his opportunities, but rather what he does with them. Now, once again, I apologize for dipping into binge watching, but the second Frank is Frank Underwood from the Netflix show House of Cards. There is no spoiler alert here. If you haven't watched it, there's no spoiler alert here. Indeed, everything we need to learn about what motivates Frank Underwood can be gleaned from the very first few episodes. Now, while he did not come from the right side of the tracks, Frank has made something of himself. In the first episode, we learn that by almost any metric, Frank is a successful congressman in a reasonably safe seat who has amassed a lot of power and wealth. He has made it to third base, and he did not start there. He has a partner in crime, his spouse of convenience, Claire, who did grow up on third base. Claire also has obtained a position of prestige and professional power. The key to Frank Underwood, as I see it, is that he is never satisfied. He has a pure and unadulterated thirst for power, prestige, control, connections, and pedigree. He is manipulating, ruthless, and vicious in his never-ending quest for more. He makes enemies, and he never forgives them. Loyalty is a one-way street, and it only runs in his direction. Every day presents him with good options, yet he chooses to create riskier and riskier options with presumed higher payoffs. Ultimately, however, the world he creates for himself has no solid foundation. It is fragile. It is a house of cards, a perpetual game of Jenga where each piece of life is pulled from one place so that it can shore up a more immediate concern. We observe people like Frank Underwood in every sector, in every geography, in every period of human history. Their choices are focused on narrow understandings of themselves, and they place no weight on how their decisions affect others. They have attractive choices, but they want different choices, better choices, choices that they are willing to use their exceptional resources to create. The Frank Underwoods of the world have choices, but they have a warped and narrow perspective that places them on the precipice of personal ruin. So far we got two Franks. We have two lenses so far: hopelessness, born from a lack of good choice, and second, extreme self-centeredness despite the presence of good choices. Well, you might be turning to yourself, one another, and think, boy, this is kind of a drag of a speech. President Hess, where there's no Wabash always fights, no talk about brotherhood, no we need to get the bell back, and we need to get the bell back. What kind of pilgrimage was this anyway? It's all about binge watching. So here's the third gift of Frank. All right, it's a hybrid of Frank, but it's actually, and it was a Catholic pilgrimage, so it's going to be Pope Francis. Pope Francis takes his name from St. Francis of Assisi, the founder of the Franciscan order, and St. Francis was canonized in the 13th century. He was born into a prosperous family, yet chose to live a life of poverty in service to the poor and the marginalized. Pope Francis knows how to be thematic. His first Vatican-authorized book, published after his first year as Pope, is a collection of sermons from which is entitled The Church of Mercy. 2 years later, the Pope named the year of 2016 as the Jubilee Year of Mercy. And in the same year, he published his first book as Pope entitled The Name of God is Mercy, which is based on interviews with Andrea Tornielli. The Year of Mercy, the Church of Mercy, the name of God is mercy. Now, economists aren't supposed to be great readers, but I think even I got the pattern here. And I am certainly not a theologian, but there are a few takeaways from what Pope Francis's writings reflect about his view of mercy, and mercy's very, very close cousin, which is compassion. As the Pope articulates in his book, mercy is divine and has to do with the judgment of sin. Compassion has a more human face. It means to suffer with, to suffer together, to not remain indifferent to the pain and the suffering of others. Pope Francis's notion of mercy, which is common to many religions, calls each of us to understand our fundamental humanity and shortcomings and to embrace the divine in a spirit of humility and a constant state of wonder. To my mind, such an understanding of mercy is an important component to lead a life of compassion, an active and radical state of empathy that helps one incorporate a broader sense of self into otherwise individual decision-making. So these are my frank thoughts along the Camino. Probably not what you expected, probably not what I expected. Hopelessness, self-centeredness, mercy, and compassion. These are primary colors that battle each other in waves across time and religion. There are other primary colors too. But these three seem very prominent in these very trying times that we find ourselves in. Well, we got to bring this back to Wabash somehow. So let me bring this back to Wabash. Our central distinctive feature at Wabash College is the gentleman's rule. The choices we get to have, which is freedom, and the consequences of the choices we make, which is responsibility. Choices can be shameless, self-centered, or compassionate. Now, I'm often asked about this most distinctive feature of the college. Can I find a less gendered version of the gentleman's rule? And trust me, the ladies and gentleman's rule doesn't really work. I get an earful about that once in a while. So the way I respond when people ask me, well, can you think about a broader concept of the gentleman's rule? I typically respond initially with the golden rule, that is to treat others as you would like to be treated. And then once I do that, I tend to pivot to kind of what I call the golden rule on steroids, or what I call the golden rule of steroids, which is a newer version of the golden rule that people continue to think through, which is to treat others not as you would like to be treated, but to treat others as they would like to be treated. What this latter translation suggests is coming to the golden rule with a sense of openness, humility, and radical empathy. Understanding the needs of others and acting on this impulse is a key component to compassion. So, let me be frank with you. After the Camino, my reflections helped me to build a color palette that allowed me to understand the world just a little bit better. There's a lot of shamelessness out there. There's a lot of self-centeredness out there. And there are some glimpses of compassion and mercy. More importantly, the Camino allowed me to come away with a greater appreciation for what we do at Wabash College and who we are here at Wabash College. At Wabash, we ask each student to be a better man, particularly in a world that has gotten angrier and more anxious, that has become more shameless and more self-centered. And we ask Wabash men to be better men. We ask Wabash men to strengthen their compassion, their understanding, and their treatment of others. So, what kind of Frank do you want to be? This is your question, gentlemen. This is your journey, your pilgrimage, your Camino. Buen Camino, gentlemen.